A bodybuilder spent 6 years building a body that looked dangerous. Bruce Lee needed only 5 seconds to prove it wasn't. Everything happened in an airport line in front of 40 witnesses. And the most surprising part wasn't the fight itself, it was what Bruce did afterward. San Francisco International Airport, September 1972. It's 9:15 in the morning, and the terminal buzzes with the usual Saturday energy. The United Airlines check-in line stretches back through a roped-off corridor with about 20 people waiting. It moves slowly, the restless shuffle of travelers who know where they need to go but can't make the process any faster. Bruce Lee stands third in line. He wears a black leather jacket over a white shirt, dark pants and sunglasses that partially hide his face. In his hand is a grey Samsonite suitcase packed with clothes for a few days and documents for meetings with producers in Los Angeles. His posture is calm and balanced, the stance of someone used to waiting. He doesn't check his watch. He simply moves forward when the line moves. A few passengers have recognized him and whisper quietly, "It's the guy from the Green Hornet." The comments come and go without turning into anything more. Bruce doesn't react. At that moment, he isn't a big celebrity. He's just a man waiting to check his bag on an ordinary September morning. The bodybuilder appears at 9:22. He is 28 years old, 6'1", and weighs 265 pounds. He's an amateur competitor from San Jose. 6 years of obsessive weight training have built a chest over 51 inches and arms measuring 22 inches. His face carries the confidence that comes from living with a physically dominant presence for a long time. He's late for his flight. A friend of similar build walks half a step behind him. Both men move through the terminal with the relaxed swagger of people who have never had to push through a crowd, because crowds always part for them. They walk alongside the check-in line like a big ship cutting through a narrow channel. The bodybuilder bumps the first man in line, an executive with a briefcase, who steps aside without protest. Then he bumps an older woman who clutches her purse tighter and says nothing. He continues until he reaches Bruce Lee and repeats the same move, the same sideways shove, the same silent assumption that the smaller body will yield to the larger one, as it always does in public spaces. But Bruce doesn't move. He barely shifts his weight and turns slightly. The shove finds no resistance, no obedience, and simply doesn't happen. Bruce keeps looking toward the counter as if nothing had touched him, because in a very real sense nothing had. The bodybuilder stops. This has never happened to him before, not in public, not from someone that size. He stares at Bruce with the expression of a man whose simplest calculation has just produced an impossible result. For a few seconds his mind seems suspended between two options: recalculate or insist on the answer that has always worked. "Hey," he says finally, "I need to get through. Big guy coming. Move." Bruce doesn't turn immediately. He keeps looking forward as if the words haven't fully registered yet. When he finally turns, he does so slowly and completely, giving the man his full attention with the calm of someone who feels no urgency to prove anything. He observes the bodybuilder for a moment over the top of his sunglasses, then removes them with a smooth motion and slips them into his jacket pocket. "The line is for everyone," Bruce says. His voice is clear and steady, like someone simply stating an obvious fact. "Wait your turn." The bodybuilder blinks. He had anticipated many possible responses from the smaller man. A quick apology, an immediate step aside, maybe a nervous laugh. Those were the reactions his size usually produced without needing words. He wasn't expecting this calm. His eyes automatically scan Bruce's body. Then they return to his own arms, making the comparison almost automatically after 6 years of gym culture. He calculates the weight, maybe 65 kilograms, 70 with the jacket. He notes the functional arms, but nothing that impresses him by the standards he considers important. In his mind, all the physical equations point to the same result. This person should move right now. "Buddy," he says with condescending patience, "I'm twice your size. Move or I'll move you." Bruce doesn't change his expression. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't shift his posture. He simply replies, "Try it." It doesn't sound like a threat. It doesn't sound like theatrical challenge. It sounds more like a calm invitation, a door politely held open to a room the bodybuilder is not yet prepared to enter. Before the tension could build any further, the airline employee behind the counter stepped in. "Gentlemen, please," she said firmly. "There will be no confrontations here. Everyone will be served in order. Please keep your place in line." The bodybuilder took a step back. His ego wasn't hurt yet. It was just paused. He positioned himself behind Bruce with the silent impatience of a man who had already decided there would be another moment to re-establish the natural order he believed had been interrupted by someone too small to challenge it. That moment came a few minutes later. When Bruce placed his suitcase on the scale, the latch wasn't fully secured. While waiting in line, he had been organizing some documents and hadn't closed it properly. The bodybuilder noticed. What happened next could be described technically as an accident, a big foot moving clumsily in a crowded space, accidentally kicking luggage on the floor. That's one version. The other version is simpler. The bodybuilder deliberately kicked the suitcase hard enough to knock it off the scale and send it sliding across the polished linoleum floor. The latch popped open and the contents spilled out. 2 shirts, a pair of training pants, and some personal items scattered across the floor of San Francisco International Airport on a busy Saturday morning in September 1972. While around 40 people watched the scene, the bodybuilder let out a loud laugh. It wasn't a spontaneous laugh. It was the calculated laugh of someone who believed he had just reasserted his dominance while keeping the appearance of an accident. Then he added something more. He turned slightly toward his friend and spoke loud enough for Bruce and everyone within 10 meters to hear, but not so loud that it seemed like he was shouting. "Look at the little Chinese guy picking up his trash. He should learn not to get in the way of bigger people." His friend laughed. Some people around them looked down. Others pretended they hadn't heard anything. The airline employee froze behind the counter. Bruce Lee didn't react visibly. He knelt down on the terminal floor and began picking up his clothes with slow, deliberate movements. These were the movements of a man who had already decided exactly how he would respond and felt no rush to do it. He folded the first shirt carefully, then the second. He placed the training pants on top. He picked up each personal item one by one and put them back into the suitcase with the same calm someone uses when organizing their desk at the end of a normal day. The bodybuilder's laughter continued for a few more seconds, but started to fade. Laughter needs a reaction to sustain itself, and Bruce gave it none. Silence began to fill the space the laughter had occupied. The bodybuilder tried to compensate with another comment, something about how some people don't understand that the world has a natural order. But now his words didn't sound as confident. Bruce finished packing everything, stood up calmly, closed the suitcase with a clean, firm click, and turned to face the bodybuilder. 40 people watched in silence. Bruce spoke with absolute clarity. "You're going to apologize," he said, "or I'm going to show you why size without skill is just dead weight." He didn't say it like a threat. He said it like a doctor announcing an inevitable diagnosis, a simple fact. The bodybuilder stared at him. He ran the calculation again. 60-something kilograms, 1.70 meters. Arms that by his standards didn't impress anyone. For 6 years that calculation had always given him the same result. He decided this time would be no different. He smiled at his friend, took a step forward, and extended his right hand toward Bruce's chest, with the typical gesture of a push meant to establish hierarchy without becoming a full assault. Technically, it was an aggression, but the hand never reached him. In the next 5 seconds, something happened that several witnesses would remember for decades. In the first second, Bruce Lee's left hand intercepted the bodybuilder's wrist and redirected the push outward with such smooth economy of motion that some witnesses later swore the big man's own arm seemed to change its mind about where it wanted to go. In the second, Bruce's right leg shot forward in a side kick aimed directly at the solar plexus. It was so fast that the human eye barely registered the movement. The power of a strike doesn't come from the size of the body. It comes from how the entire body moves together. It is born from what experts call the kinetic chain. First, the legs push against the ground, then the hips rotate with precision, then the torso contracts. All that coordinated movement channels the body's energy into a single point. The force starts from the floor, travels through every part of the body, and concentrates in Bruce's extended leg. His kick landed exactly where energy transfers most efficiently, the diaphragm. That's why 63 kilograms of Bruce Lee, organized in a perfect sequence of movement, could generate more power than 120 kilograms of uncoordinated mass. Real strength isn't in size, it's in efficiency of motion. In the 3rd second, the impact reached the bodybuilder's diaphragm. The muscle went into immediate spasm. The man's mouth flew open, but no sound came out. Air disappeared. It neither entered nor left. His hands instinctively flew to his stomach while his body tried to understand what had just happened. In the 4th second, Bruce had already moved again. His left leg swept the bodybuilder's only supporting leg at the exact moment when all his weight was committed to it. The mechanics were simple. Remove the point of support when the center of gravity is already displaced. The result wasn't a slow or clumsy fall. It was a sudden collapse. In the 5th second, the 265 pounds hit the airport floor with a heavy thud that echoed around the terminal. He lay on his back on the linoleum, conscious but completely unable to react. Bruce Lee did not follow him to the ground. He did not lean over him. He did not add any extra words. He simply turned back toward the counter, picked up his suitcase, and with complete serenity said to the airline employee, "Sorry for the interruption. My bag is within the weight limit." The people around the scale stared at it as if they needed several seconds to remember what they had been doing before all this happened. "Yes, 19 kilograms, the employee finally answered, her hands trembling slightly as she printed the boarding pass. "It's within the limit." She handed it over. Bruce took it with a polite nod, thanked her, and walked calmly toward the waiting area as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Behind him, the bodybuilder slowly began to regain his breath. It took him almost 2 minutes to sit up. His friend helped him while he tried to process what had just happened. When he finally managed to stand, he searched the terminal with his eyes until he found Bruce. He wasn't looking for revenge. He was looking with the expression of a man whose fundamental concept of the world had just been corrected in the most direct way possible. For 6 years he had believed that 265 pounds of muscle were a guarantee of dominance in any physical confrontation. That belief disappeared in 5 seconds. Years later, a bodybuilding magazine published an anonymous interview with a competitor who described how he learned the difference between aesthetic strength and functional strength after a public confrontation that humbled him in front of 40 strangers in an airport. In the interview he said, "I spent 6 years building a body that looked dangerous. I discovered in 5 seconds that looking dangerous and being dangerous are 2 completely different things. What stayed with the bodybuilder the most wasn't the kick itself, or the speed, or even the public humiliation. It was what happened afterward." Bruce Lee didn't stand over him. He didn't say another word. He simply turned back to the counter, finished checking his bag, took his boarding pass, and walked away with the same calm he had shown the entire time. That quiet departure haunted the bodybuilder for years. In the anonymous interview he gave much later, he described the moment this way. "The man who taught me that lesson didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He didn't even look back. He just picked up his boarding pass and left. That was the part that followed me the longest. Not the technique, not the fall, but the feeling that for Bruce Lee what had just happened wasn't extraordinary. It was ordinary, as routine as checking a suitcase. 5 seconds. That number defines the entire story. 5 seconds from the moment the bodybuilder extended his hand to push until he was lying on the airport floor struggling to breathe. 5 seconds that contained the entire difference between size and skill, between mass and precision, between using the body as intimidation and turning the body into a precise instrument. The bodybuilder had brought 6 years of gym training. Bruce Lee had brought 20 years of purposeful, intelligent practice. And the difference between those 2 kinds of work became visible in 5 seconds, in a way no explanation could have made clearer. 50 years later, every time someone in a gym confuses the size of a muscle with the true capability of the body that carries it, the lesson is still waiting to be learned. Because some lessons require a certain kind of teacher, and sometimes those teachers appear in airports on Saturday mornings wearing a leather jacket, carrying a grey suitcase, and having the patience to wait their turn in line until the moment comes to teach. The bodybuilder never forgot that morning. He continued training, but something fundamental had shifted. He began studying movement, efficiency, and timing, instead of just chasing bigger numbers on the scale. He learned that real power doesn't announce itself with noise or size. It arrives quietly, efficiently, and leaves no doubt. Bruce Lee continued on to his meetings in Los Angeles. He boarded his flight, sat in his seat, and most likely thought about the script he was working on or the next training session. For him, the encounter in the check-in line had been just another moment of applying what he practiced every day, using the least amount of energy to achieve the necessary result. But for the 40 witnesses in that terminal, and especially for the big man who ended up on the floor, it became a story they would tell for the rest of their lives. Not as a tale of violence, but as a lesson in humility, presence, and the difference between looking strong and being truly capable. Some lessons don't need long speeches or dramatic declarations. Sometimes they arrive in 5 quiet seconds on an ordinary Saturday morning in an airport, delivered by a man who simply refused to yield his place in line. The bodybuilder eventually stood up with help from his friend. He didn't try to continue the confrontation. He simply looked across the terminal toward Bruce Lee with an expression that had changed completely. The confidence was gone. In its place was the quiet shock of someone whose entire understanding of strength had just been rewritten in 5 seconds. He never forgot that morning. Years later, in an anonymous interview with a bodybuilding magazine, he described the encounter as the most important lesson of his life. He said he had spent 6 years building a body that looked dangerous, only to discover in 5 seconds that looking dangerous and being dangerous are 2 completely different things. He kept training, but something fundamental shifted inside him. He started studying movement, timing, efficiency, and coordination instead of just chasing bigger numbers on the scale. He learned that real power doesn't announce itself with noise or size. It arrives quietly, precisely, and leaves no room for doubt. Bruce Lee continued on to Los Angeles for his meetings. He boarded his flight, sat in his seat, and most likely thought about the script he was working on, or his next training session. For him, the moment in the check-in line had simply been another opportunity to apply what he practiced every single day, using the least amount of energy to achieve the necessary result. But for the 40 witnesses in that terminal, and especially for the big man who ended up on the floor, it became a story they would tell for the rest of their lives. Not as a tale of violence or ego, but as a powerful lesson in humility, presence, and the true nature of strength. Some lessons don't need long speeches or dramatic declarations. Sometimes they arrive in 5 quiet seconds on an ordinary Saturday morning in an airport, delivered by a man who simply refused to step aside when someone tried to push him out of his rightful place in line. 50 years later, the story still resonates. Every time someone confuses the size of their muscles with real capability, or believes that looking strong automatically means being strong, the lesson waits patiently to be remembered. Because some truths are best learned not from books or speeches, but from a calm man in a leather jacket who waits his turn, responds with precision when necessary, and then continues on his way as if nothing extraordinary had happened. That is the real power Bruce Lee showed that day. Not just the ability to win a confrontation, but the wisdom to do it without losing your peace, without needing to prove anything extra, and without turning a small moment into something bigger than it needed to be. The bodybuilder learned it the hard way, on the floor of an airport terminal. The rest of us can learn it the easier way, by listening to the story, and remembering that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who doesn't feel the need to prove it.